I was bedridden for days after surgery, and when I asked for soup, my daughter-in-law walked in and said, "I'm not your nurse. Starve for all I care." My son never came to check on me. When I finally got up, I found my medication dumped in the trash. But she had no idea I installed a tiny camera the night before that captured everything that would soon. "I just need something warm, soup maybe," I rasped, my voice barely making it past my cracked lips, and I watched Vanessa standing in the doorway of my bedroom with her arms crossed tight against her chest like I was something disgusting she had stepped in. "I am not your nurse," she said, her voice flat and cold as winter steel. "Starve for all I care." And then she turned on her heel and walked out, the door slamming so hard the picture frames on my nightstand rattled. I lay there in my bed, still feeling the deep ache from the surgery that had carved into me just 3 days ago, my body screaming with every shallow breath, and I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that I had made a terrible mistake trusting her, trusting my own son to protect me when I was at my most vulnerable. My name is Althea Rickwell. I am 68 years old, and I have always been too proud for my own good, too stubborn to admit when I need help, too afraid of being a burden to ask for what I deserve, and those flaws had brought me to this moment. Lying in soiled sheets because I could not even make it to the bathroom alone, relying on a daughter-in-law who hated me and a son who had checked out of my life the moment he said I do. The surgery had been necessary, my doctor said, a repair to damage that had been building for years, but the recovery was brutal, and I had foolishly believed that family would step up, that blood would mean something when I needed it most. Now I knew better. Now I understood that I was alone in this house that I had paid for, surrounded by people who wished I would just disappear. The hours dragged by like centuries, the sunlight moving across my bedroom wall in slow motion, while my throat burned with thirst and my stomach twisted with hunger, and I called out again and again, but no one came, no one cared, no one even pretended to hear me. On the second day, I tried to get up myself, swinging my legs over the side of the bed with determination fueled by desperation, but the pain that ripped through my abdomen sent me crashing back onto the mattress, tears streaming down my face as I gasped for air. I am not a woman who cries easily. I have weathered too much in my life to break down over physical pain, but this was different. This was humiliation mixed with agony, mixed with the dawning realization that I might actually die in this room, while my son watched television downstairs. I heard them sometimes, Vanessa and Elias, laughing together in the living room, the clink of wine glasses, the sound of the television playing some comedy show, and I wanted to scream, but I had no voice left, no strength left, nothing but this burning rage that was starting to replace the fear. My stubbornness, my damned pride, kept me from calling anyone else, from reaching out to my few remaining friends or neighbors, because I did not want them to see me like this, weak and helpless and abandoned by my own child. That pride almost killed me, I see that now, but it also saved me in a way, because it transformed into something harder, something colder, something that would not forgive or forget. On the fourth day, I forced myself up again, this time moving in tiny increments, sliding my feet to the floor and using the nightstand to pull myself upright, my vision swimming with black spots as I stood there swaying like a drunk. I shuffled toward the door, each step an eternity of pain, my hand pressed against the wall for support, and I made it to the hallway, then to the stairs, then down each step with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The kitchen was empty, dishes piled in the sink, and I dragged myself to the refrigerator, pulling it open to find it stocked with fresh groceries, evidence that Vanessa had been shopping, had been cooking, had been feeding herself and Elias while letting me starve upstairs. My hands shook as I reached for a bottle of water, unscrewing the cap and drinking so fast I choked, water spilling down my chin and onto my nightgown. Then I saw it, my medication bottle in the trash can, the orange plastic bright against the dark garbage bag, and I pulled it out with trembling fingers, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Empty, completely empty, when it should have been nearly full, when I had only taken 2 doses before the surgery, when there should have been weeks' worth of pain medication left to get me through recovery. I stood there in that kitchen, water dripping from my chin, staring at that empty bottle, and something inside me cracked open, not with sadness but with clarity, cold and sharp as a knife. That is when I remembered the camera, the tiny security camera I had hidden in the bookshelf of my bedroom 2 weeks before the surgery, placed there on a whim, because something about Vanessa had been making me uneasy, the way she looked at me sometimes when she thought I was not watching, the way she smiled when I mentioned updating my will. I am paranoid, I had told myself then. I am seeing threats where none exist, but I had left the camera there anyway, my suspicious nature overruling my desire to trust. And now I dragged myself back upstairs, every muscle screaming, and retrieved it from behind the row of old books, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I could barely work my old laptop. My fingers felt thick and clumsy, but I managed to plug in the camera and wait for the footage to load, watching that little spinning wheel on the screen while my heart pounded in my ears. Then it started playing, and I saw myself sleeping in the bed, saw the door open, saw Vanessa walk in with that same cold expression she always wore around me, and I watched her stand there for a long moment just looking at me, her head tilted like she was studying an insect. She walked to my nightstand, picked up the medication bottle, and I held my breath as she unscrewed the cap and dumped every single pill into her palm, then walked to my bathroom and flushed them down the toilet, the sound of the water rushing clearly audible on the recording. But it was what she did next that made my blood turn to ice. She walked back to my bedside, leaned down close to my sleeping face, and whispered, "Let us see how long you last, old woman," and then she smiled, actually smiled, before walking out. I watched that footage 7 times in a row, my shock giving way to something darker, something that felt like hatred but tasted like vengeance, and I realized that my son's wife had tried to kill me, had deliberately withheld medication that I needed to manage pain so severe it could cause complications. Could cause my blood pressure to spike, could cause my heart to give out. She had not just neglected me, she had actively worked to harm me, to make me suffer, to possibly end my life, and my son, my precious Elias, who I had raised alone after his father died, who I had sacrificed everything for, had either known and done nothing or had been too wrapped up in his own life to notice his mother was being tortured under his roof. My obsessive nature, my tendency to fixate on things until I could not sleep or eat or think of anything else, took over completely then, and I started making lists in my head, cataloguing every slight, every moment of disrespect, every time Elias had chosen Vanessa over me, every instance where I had felt unwelcome in my own home. I barely slept for the next week, my mind racing with plans and possibilities, my body slowly healing while my heart hardened into something unrecognizable, and I knew I could not just confront them, could not just show them the video and expect justice, because what I wanted now was not justice. What I wanted was for them to feel what I had felt, to suffer as I had suffered, to understand what it meant to be helpless and afraid and abandoned. First I called my lawyer, Lorna Velez, a woman I had known for 30 years who had handled my late husband's estate and my own legal affairs, and I told her I needed to see her immediately, that it was a matter of life and death. "Can you come to the house?" I asked, knowing that if I tried to drive myself I might pass out, and she said yes, of course, her voice full of concern that made me want to cry, but I held it together because I could not afford to be weak anymore. Lorna arrived that afternoon while Vanessa was out shopping and Elias was at work, and I showed her the footage, watched her face go from confused to horrified to furious, and she said, "Althea, we need to call the police right now. This is attempted murder," but I shook my head. "Not yet," I told her. "First I need you to help me with something else," and I laid out my plan, watching her frown deepen with each word. "This house is in joint ownership with Elias," I explained. "I added him to the deed 5 years ago when Vanessa convinced him it would be good for estate planning, but I want it back. I want everything back in my name alone. Can we do that?" Lorna tapped her pen against her legal pad, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "We can," she said slowly. "You can execute a quick claim deed, essentially removing Elias from the title, but he would need to sign it," and she paused, "unless there are grounds for undue influence or if he signed under duress originally." I leaned forward, my ribs still aching but my mind clear. "What if I told you I signed that deed while on pain medication after my husband's funeral?" I said. "What if I told you Vanessa was the one who suggested it, and pushed the paperwork in front of me when I was grieving and not thinking clearly?" Lorna's expression shifted, her lawyer mind already working through the angles. "That could work," she said, "especially combined with this evidence of abuse, and the fact that you are the sole financial contributor to the household. We can argue that the transfer should be voided." Over the next 2 weeks, while I pretended to be recovering slowly, while I played the part of the weak and grateful mother-in-law, Lorna and I worked in secret, gathering every piece of documentation we needed, every bank statement showing that I had paid every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every property tax, that Elias and Vanessa had contributed nothing, that they were living in my house on my dime while trying to kill me. We found a judge who agreed to hear an emergency petition, and within 10 days I had full ownership of the house restored to my name alone, the deed changed without Elias ever knowing until it was done. I also changed my will, removing both Elias and Vanessa completely, leaving everything to charity except for a small bequest to my late husband's sister, and I made sure Lorna had copies of everything, that if something happened to me, there would be a record of what they had done. But the will and the house were just the beginning. They were just the setup for what I really wanted, which was to watch Vanessa's face when she realized she had destroyed her own future, when she understood that her cruelty had cost her everything. My obsessive planning took over completely. I could not think about anything else, could barely eat or sleep because I was too busy imagining how it would unfold. And I knew this was not healthy, knew that I was letting revenge consume me. But I did not care anymore because the old Althea was dead. The trusting, foolish woman who had believed in family loyalty had died in that bed, while her daughter-in-law flushed her medication down the toilet. I also started documenting everything, keeping a journal with dates and times, noting every instance of neglect, every meal I was denied, every request for help that went unanswered, and I saved all the footage from the camera, making multiple copies and storing them in different locations. I reached out to my neighbor, Celeste Ibarra, a woman around my age who I had always been friendly with but never close to, and I invited her over for tea one afternoon when Vanessa was out. Celeste came with homemade cookies and a worried expression, and she sat in my kitchen looking at me with kind eyes. "Althea," she said gently, "I have been worried about you. I have not seen you outside in weeks. Are you all right?" "I am not," I told her honestly, "and I need someone to know what is happening in case something goes wrong." And I showed her some of the footage, not all of it, just enough to make her gasp and cover her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God," she whispered, "does Elias know?" And I shook my head. "I do not think so," I said. "I think he is willfully blind. He does not want to see what his wife is." And Celeste reached across the table and took my hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked, and I smiled, a smile I knew did not reach my eyes. "I am going to make sure they never hurt anyone else," I told her. "I am going to make sure they understand that actions have consequences." And she squeezed my hand and said, "If you need a witness, if you need someone to back you up, I am here." The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after my surgery, when I was strong enough to stand without shaking, when the pain had receded to a dull ache I could manage without medication. I had planned every detail, had rehearsed every word, had prepared for every possible reaction, and I waited until dinner time, until they were both seated at my dining room table eating the food I had cooked. Yes, I had cooked it myself, pushing through the pain to create this moment of normalcy before I shattered everything. I sat down across from them, my laptop tucked under my arm, and I placed it on the table between us. The screen still dark. Elias looked up from his plate, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Mom," he said, surprised, "you should not be up, you should be resting." I smiled at him, that same cold smile I had given Celeste. "I have rested enough," I said, "and now we need to talk about something important." And I opened the laptop, turned it so they could both see the screen, and pressed play. The video started, the footage clear and damning, Vanessa's face visible as she entered my bedroom, as she approached my sleeping form, and I watched Elias' expression change from confusion to concern to horror as he saw what his wife had done. "What the hell is this?" he said, his voice rising, and Vanessa had gone completely pale, her eyes fixed on the screen like she was watching her own execution. "That is your wife," I said calmly, "attempting to murder me by withholding my medication after major surgery," and Elias turned to Vanessa, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood up. "Vanessa," he said, his voice shaking, "tell me this is not what it looks like, tell me there is some explanation." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "It is not," she started, her voice trembling, "it is not what you think, I was trying to." "Trying to what?" I interrupted, my voice sharp as broken glass. "Trying to kill me, trying to make me suffer so much that my body would give out. Was that your plan, to wait for me to die so you could have this house, so you could have whatever you thought I would leave you?" Vanessa's face twisted with rage then, all pretense of innocence dropping away like a mask. "You have never liked me," she spat. "You have always treated me like I was not good enough for your precious son, always looking down on me, always making me feel small," and I snapped, my own anger finally breaking free. "So you decided to torture me," I shouted. "You decided that the appropriate response to feeling unwelcome was to let me suffer alone in agony, was to deny me the medication I needed to heal, was to whisper about wanting me dead." "I never," she started, but I cut her off. "I have it on video," I said. "I have you on video saying let us see how long you last. I have you on video dumping my medication. I have weeks of footage of you ignoring my cries for help. And I have witnesses who saw how you treated me." Elias sank back into his chair, his face in his hands, and I felt a flash of pity for him that I immediately crushed because he had allowed this. He had chosen to believe his wife over his own mother, had chosen comfort over truth. "You knew," I said to him, "maybe not about the medication, maybe not about the video, but you knew she was mistreating me. You heard me calling for help and you did nothing. You sat downstairs drinking wine while I was upstairs starving and in pain, so do not pretend you are innocent in this." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "I did not know it was this bad," he whispered. "I thought you were just being difficult. Vanessa said you were exaggerating, that you did not really need help, and I wanted to believe her because it was easier than dealing with it." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow, the confirmation that my own son had chosen willful ignorance over protecting me, and I felt something break inside my chest that I knew would never heal. "You chose easier," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You chose comfort over your mother's life, and now you are going to live with that choice." Vanessa stood up suddenly, her chair falling backward and clattering to the floor. "I am not going to sit here and be accused," she said, her voice high and defensive. "I am leaving," and she grabbed her purse from the counter and headed for the door. You can leave, I called after her, but understand this, I am pressing charges. I am taking this video to the police, and by tomorrow everyone in this town will know what you did. Every friend you have, every job you apply to, everyone will know you are the kind of person who tries to kill helpless old women. She froze in the doorway, her back rigid, and for a moment I thought she might come back and attack me, might finally drop all pretense and show the violence I knew was lurking beneath her surface, but instead she just walked out, the door slamming behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Elias sat there staring at the closed laptop, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and I felt my stubbornness rising again, my refusal to comfort him or make this easier because he did not deserve easy. He deserved to sit in the wreckage of what his cowardice had created. "Mom," he said finally, his voice broken, "I am so sorry, I should have," and he could not even finish his sentences, could not even articulate the magnitude of his failure. I stood up, my body still aching but my resolve solid as iron. "Sorry is not enough," I told him. "Sorry does not erase the days I spent lying in my own waste because no one would help me to the bathroom. Sorry does not erase the pain I endured because your wife flushed my medication. Sorry does not bring back the trust I had in you as my son," and he flinched like I had struck him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, and I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "I want you to leave," I said. "I want you to pack your things and get out of my house. The house that is solely in my name now, by the way. The house you thought you would inherit, but that I have already removed you from completely," and his head snapped up. "What do you mean?" he asked, and I pulled out the new deed from my folder of documents, sliding it across the table. "I mean I voided the transfer that added you to the title," I said. "I mean this house is mine alone, and you have no legal claim to it. I mean when I die everything I own is going to charity and you will get nothing, not one single dollar for what you have done." And I watched the reality crash over him like a wave, watched him realize that his passivity had cost him everything. He tried to argue, tried to say I was being unfair, tried to claim that Vanessa had manipulated him too, but I was done listening, done caring about his excuses, and I told him he had 24 hours to remove his belongings or I would have them thrown in the street. I spent that night alone in my house, the first time in weeks I had truly been alone, and I waited for relief to come, waited to feel satisfaction, but instead I just felt hollow, empty in a way I had not anticipated. The next morning I called Detective Hugo Sarmiento, a man Lorna had recommended, and I showed him everything, the video, my medical records, the journal I had kept, Celeste's statement as a witness to my condition, and I watched his jaw tighten as he reviewed the evidence. "This is serious," he said. "This could be attempted murder or at minimum criminal neglect causing bodily harm. We will need to bring her in for questioning." And I nodded. "I want her arrested," I said. "I want her to face consequences. I want everyone to know what she is," and he assured me they would pursue it fully. The arrest happened 2 days later, police showing up at the apartment where Vanessa had been staying with a friend, and I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had screamed and fought, had claimed I was lying, had insisted the video was fake, even though forensic analysis proved it was authentic. The local news picked up the story, a headline about an elderly woman nearly killed by her daughter-in-law after surgery, and suddenly my quiet street was filled with reporters and cameras, everyone wanting to interview me, wanting to hear my side. I gave one interview, just one, to a local reporter who seemed genuinely empathetic, and I told the truth simply and clearly, described what had been done to me, showed the evidence, and let the public draw their own conclusions. The response was overwhelming, messages of support flooding in from strangers, offers of help, expressions of outrage at what I had endured, and I realized that my story had touched something deeper, had resonated with people who had their own experiences of being vulnerable and abandoned by those who should have protected them. Vanessa's trial was scheduled for 6 months later, and in that time, I watched her life systematically fall apart the way mine almost had, watched her lose her job when the video went viral online, watched her friends distance themselves, watched her family issue public statements condemning her actions. Elias tried to reach out several times, leaving voicemails and sending letters, but I did not respond, could not bring myself to engage with him because every time I heard his voice I remembered lying in that bed calling for him and hearing nothing but silence. The trial itself was brief, the evidence too overwhelming for her to mount any real defense, and she was sentenced to 3 years in prison for criminal neglect and reckless endangerment, the judge noting that her actions could easily have resulted in my death, and that the deliberate nature of the harm made it particularly egregious. I sat in the courtroom and watched her being led away in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage and tears, and I waited to feel vindicated, but instead I just felt tired, bone-deep tired in a way sleep could not fix. The aftermath was strange. My house felt too big without anyone else in it, my days felt too quiet, and I found myself sometimes missing the sounds of other people even though those people had tried to harm me, which I knew was messed up but could not help feeling anyway. Celeste checked on me regularly, bringing food and company, and gradually I started to rebuild some kind of life, started to find purposes beyond revenge and survival. I volunteered at a senior center, helping other elderly people who were being mistreated by family members, using my experience to advocate for better protections and more oversight, and I found that helping others gave me something my revenge never could, which was a sense of meaning, a sense that something good had come from my suffering. But I would be lying if I said I regained what I lost, would be lying if I said I ever fully trusted anyone again or felt safe being vulnerable, because those things died in that bedroom and no amount of justice could bring them back. Then about 8 months after the trial, I was reviewing the footage again, something I did sometimes when I could not sleep, when the memories became too loud and I needed to remind myself that what happened was real and not just paranoia. I was watching the section where Vanessa dumped my medication, had watched it hundreds of times by then, but this time something caught my eye, something in the reflection of the dark window behind where she stood. I paused the video, zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as my basic laptop software would allow, and I saw it clearly, a figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom, partially obscured by shadow but definitely there, definitely watching Vanessa destroy my medication and doing nothing to stop her. My heart started racing as I studied the reflection, trying to make out features, trying to identify who it was, and then with a sick lurch of recognition I realized the build was too large to be Vanessa, the height too tall, and the clothes looked like the shirt I had seen Elias wearing that same week. My son had been there, had watched his wife flush my medication, had heard her whisper about wanting me dead, and had walked away without saying a word, without stopping her, without warning me, and somehow this felt worse than everything Vanessa had done, because at least she had never pretended to love me. I sat there in my quiet house staring at that frozen image on my laptop screen, and I understood finally that my revenge had been incomplete, that I had punished Vanessa, but let Elias escape with only the loss of an inheritance, when what he had done was arguably worse because it was a betrayal not just of care, but of the bond between mother and child. I could go to the police with this new evidence, could try to have him charged as an accomplice, but something in me resisted, some part of me that still remembered the little boy he had been before life and marriage and weakness, had turned him into someone I did not recognize. So instead I did something else. I sent him a copy of the enhanced image with a single line of text. I know you were there, I know you watched, I know you let her do it. And then I blocked his number, blocked his email, cut off every possible avenue of contact because I realized that the cruelest revenge was not punishment but absence. Not making him suffer, but removing myself entirely from his life, so he would have to live with what he had done without ever getting the chance to explain or apologize or seek forgiveness. The twist, I suppose, is that revenge did not heal me the way I thought it would, did not restore what was taken or make me whole again. It just replaced one kind of pain with another, trading the acute agony of betrayal for the chronic ache of isolation. And I understood too late that my obsessive need for justice had cost me the parts of myself that might have been able to move forward, might have been able to forgive not for them but for me. My stubbornness, my pride, my inability to ask for help or show weakness, those flaws that I had thought were strengths had led me to this moment, sitting alone in a house full of ghosts, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships I could never rebuild, and I wondered sometimes if Vanessa sitting in her prison cell felt any more trapped than I did in mine. But I also knew I would make the same choices again, would pursue the same revenge, would burn the same bridges, because that is who I am, for better or worse, a woman who cannot let go, who cannot forgive. Who would rather be right than be happy, and maybe that is my real punishment, not what they did to me, but what I did to myself in response.